I'm Jeffrey Linehan, and this is the 80s Toy Aisle. Tonight, we're looking at the untold story behind Transformers. My guest is Jim Sorenson, whose research for the ARC and Legacy books has uncovered production art, internal documents, and design iterations that reveal how business strategy shaped the toys we loved. Jim, thanks for joining me.
Well, you're welcome. Glad to be here.
I wanted to mention that a little thing we have in common. My first Transformer was also Prowl.
The G1 version?
Yeah,
Yeah,
back in
nice.
1984. Um,
How long did it take you to break the roof?
to break. No, I didn't break the roof. I
What
think
about the waist?
uh, the waist. Yes, the waist was broken. Yep. And I've heard the same thing with Mirage. That Mirage tends to have that waist just break
Yeah,
apart.
it's tricky. It's
Yeah.
tricky. Those old Japanese Diaclone toys. They're beautiful, but a little fragile.
Yeah. Also the window, like the back windows, right where the feet are,
Mhm.
they can take some damage too.
They can. Yeah, I think I managed to keep those relatively nice on mine, but yeah, the roof snapped off almost immediately.
Oh. Um, before let me see. Before we get into the questions, I want to tell you what I think is the one supreme holy grail. The master animation for the final aired versions of the G1 cartoon. Um, I know we got super excellent vivid animation cells, the on the DVDs, the Rhino DVDs, but
Sure.
somewhere along the line somebody threw out, oh, we don't need those anymore with the broadcast masters.
Yeah. I mean, it's a shame, and there's so many tweaks along the way, right? So the Rhino stuff, used a lot of the earlier versions. So things that weren't a problem on broadcast were a problem with Rhino. So, and I know groups like Shout Factory have done their level best to try and restore it. But yeah, it's a tricky endeavor.
Yeah, I've been thinking that perhaps with AI, perhaps there's a way of recoloring or fixing the errors, but it's a daunting task. It's just
Yeah, I mean, maybe my instinct usually is to do sort of fan crowdsourcing kind of work because if you have, 2,000 man hours of work, like that's a lot. But if you have 200 people working on it, right, that's a doable task.
On the other hand, though, um, it does show us the early versions, before their corrections were made. So from an archival point of view, um, there is some
Yeah, it's
value to
it's it's
that.
interesting to see, and when you're looking at scripts, dialogue scripts, and full scripts that have dialogue that's gotten cut out, or even scenes that have been fully storyboarded that didn't make it in. It's an interesting comparison. I've been going through some from Grimlock's New Brain for a potential panel that we might want to do with maybe down in Orlando or something. But it's interesting to see that evolution of the story and what ideas got cut. The Terracons are introduced more or less in that episode, and they had a little bit more to do in the script and in the boards than made it into the final episode. Not a lot more, but a line here or there just to try and give you a sense as to what their personality might be. So
Yeah.
that's an interesting one because it went through so many evolutions. There's a completely different version, like it doesn't even have anything to do with Grimlock,
Oh, really?
of a Technobot origin story. I don't think it got past the pitch phase, but there was a pitch by Paul Davids of what here's a way that might introduce the Technobots, and winds up being totally different. And I think he had a different idea of, well, what if Grimlock gets smart, and then they wound up sort of merging the story idea, the compelling story idea of Grimlock's Flowers for Algernon journey with the sort of Hasbro necessitated, like, well, we do need to have an origin for the Technobots.
Mhm. I'd like to get into that further, particularly about the Transformers movie, because I know you,
Now, the movie, yeah,
yeah.
that was quite quite the archaeological dig, splunking through Flint Dilley's garage and getting the first the as far as we know the very first draft of the Transformers the movie by Ron, and we'd had this second draft for quite a while. That was something else I'd worked with, crowdsourcing on with a bunch of people from the Transformers Wiki. We pooled our resources and we bought a bunch of auctions and we put all the scripts online. And one of them was the second draft of the film, which had some pretty interesting differences. That's where things like the Roboto Zoo show up, and the sort of the Autobot versions of the Predacons show up instead of the Dinobots, who are the ones who would have fought Devastator. So it's interesting to see some of the and a lot of things. Like, I was just having an online discussion. Somebody said, "Well, where was Blaster in the second half of the movie?" It's like, well, the answer is he was supposed to be leading a guerrilla, you know, battle against the sweeps, and that all got cut out. But he didn't get written back into the sort of second half of the film. So,
Yeah.
I guess he just was minding the store. It's not a terrible idea.
He's one of the background characters. I like to think like there were like hundreds of different characters, and I'm reminded of was it David? David, right? David. Oh, he's the one who wrote the Rebirth, and I'm just
David
thinking
Wise?
David Wise, and it's like you've got all these new characters, and it's you have to do it in like 3 episodes of a Rebirth. How do
Yeah,
you
the
fit it
Rebirth
in?
is by far the worst ratio of new characters to episodes that they ever had. There's some bad ones, but that one in particular, that's an interesting one because he has said, oh, at one point there was a 5 issue version of it. I don't. I think that might be his memory playing tricks on him.
Hmm.
Well, there's no real evidence that it ever would have been a 5 episode um, story. And in fact, there's some evidence that the only reason we got the 3 episodes we got was because Hasbro had sort of blocked out time to do Air Raiders, and then didn't do it. So they had sort of 3 hour, yeah, 3 half-hour cartoon production slots that they sort of had already committed resources to, and
Oh,
then Air Raiders didn't wind up, generating enough sales at Toy Fair to sort of make it worth their while. So, one theory, and I can't guarantee, I can't say definitively it's correct, but I think there's a lot of evidence that would support it. Is that those 3 visionary episodes wound up getting ported over to become a Transformers, season 4, if you want to call it, or Coda, whatever, however you want to characterize the 3 episode rebirth that we got.
oh,
Um,
that's interesting.
and it's a nice, it is a nice commercial for, most of the 1987 product manages to make it in there. A
Hmm.
few guys don't, but most of them do. Beyond even the headmasters and the target masters, right? I mean, the clones have a little sequence, and Six Shot has a or villain moment, and Punch Counterpunch has his really goofy little moment. So they really did their best. Yeah, you didn't get the duo cons except in, I think, Flywheels is in the credits.
Yeah,
Um,
split screen, split moment,
yeah,
something like
yeah.
that. Yeah.
The Monster Bots aren't in there, but
But yeah, it would make sense if it were if it turned out to be a 5 part thing because as I recall the Five Faces of Darkness began season 3 and More Than Meets the Eye I think was either
that
three-parter.
was 3.
Three, okay, all right. But yeah, when I was watching it, growing up with it, I saw it firsthand. I watched it firsthand, and the Return of Optimus Prime seemed to kind of finalize it. Galvatron says There will be no war today, Optimus Prime. You've heard, and
Yeah, and they shake hands. Yeah, no, I
yeah,
mean you could jump off at the end of season three, and it is a more satisfying conclusion than the end of season one or season two. One has a nod to this might be the end, but season two doesn't. Um, but yeah, I mean, you could easily end after the end of Return of Optimus Prime, and in fact, in Japan, you would,
yeah.
at least as far as Transformers 2010, which was what they called it, would go.
Yeah. I couldn't continue on without first asking you, as a longtime fan yourself, what was the specific spark moment where you transitioned from simply collecting, being a collector, to realizing the production history on these characters needed to be archived, needed to be put out there?
So I had won on eBay a Transformers comic book production Bible for quite a lot of money. Although I wound up figuring out who had bid the second amount of money and sort of selling it to them after I had copied it because I didn't actually care about owning the original paper documents. I just really wanted the information that was in it. And I just loved the designs. But that was kind of when I started um, going after the paperwork and the production documents to try and mostly because I liked the imagery. They'd used the animation models, the character animation models that made up the bulk of the Bible, along with Bob's extended biographies. The longer the ones that show up in like things like Transformers Universe or
Mhm.
Transformers A to Z in the
The,
UK.
the comic book, the four-issue comic
Yeah,
book.
yeah, the Transformers Universe comic book. But it's the tech specs, but expanded, or
Oh,
rather, more accurately, the tech specs were his bios condensed. But it would be between the long bios and the animation models. That was what most of what the Transformers comic Bible was. But I'd seen those designs before in Japanese laser discs, and I didn't really know what they were. I just thought they were really neat to have these sort of schematic black and white versions, front and back in most cases, of the characters in their robot form and in their alternate forms. So I thought it was neat, so I bought it, and then I wound up getting uh, laid off of work, and I was in between jobs for a little bit, and my buddy Bill Forster, who was at the time the art director over at the Intrepid Sea Air Space Museum in New York. That's the aircraft carrier that you can go to, and it has planes and helicopters and World War II exhibits, and it's pretty cool. But he was the art director over there, and he said, "Well, why don't we pitch this as a book?" And he had, I think in those days he had more sort of credibility than I did because his profession. I was basically just fanboy, but the two of us wound up shopping that around and eventually selling it to IDW, and it became the Transformers the Ark books. And then Bob Budiansky was nice enough to let me go to his house and scan in a bunch more documents because there were a lot of gaps. There's a lot of animation models we just didn't have that we wanted to, and yeah, he helped really push us over the line to having a good amount of nice models, enough to do a book, but to something that had almost everything. And we had very few gaps. We had a few where we had some really preliminary stuff, or occasionally we had to use the Transformers Universe comic book versions, which in a few cases had, especially the later cases, had been inked over. So we were trying to sort of de-ink them. We had access to
really?
the originals. Not they might have actually been originals, but Bob, they might have been first generation photocopies. But you could pull the line work out of it, but it was labor intensive to do that,
Mm.
and I don't know if we always did a great job on that. But we did the best we could, and the 2006 technology that we had available to us. But yeah, that was kind of it. Was buying that Bible, and
Yeah.
yeah, it's I'm very interested in the paperwork, especially the art, the design, production artwork. I have a couple of originals behind me.
Yeah, what is
Actually,
that? Let me
yeah, that's
tell me more.
uh, those are Florideri pieces. Those are his actual, pencils and inks for
Oh,
Cybertron, the planet from More Than Meets the Eye, and then underneath is the banana pan when
oh,
Gaz goes by. you know,
Uh-huh.
like that would
It,
be
the
right.
shot
It's
that
not,
so many fans, I'm sure, look at when they, oh, this is, this is, if we
yeah.
had a whole Cybertron series, this is what we would have been looking at.
Yeah, well, I mean, Cybertron was such a great setting, and it's you can see how much the writers were interested in it because pretty much as soon as the more than meets the eye pilot, sorry, my brain's working faster than my tongue. Um, Pretty much as soon as the More Than Meets the Eye pilot was over and they went to their season one, they almost immediately start working on getting back to Cybertron with the space bridge and Shockwave and whatnot. They kind of walk back. It's almost a shame in a way because the premise of More Than Meets the Eye that like they've crashed. It's 4 million years later. I mean that is a enormous time jump that they effectively do nothing with, because Shockwave is still out there like trying to call him. I mean, it could have been a 20-year time jump, like in Transformers Animated, and dramatically it would have been almost exactly. I guess you would have had to explain why no one noticed, them
Yeah.
crashing if it was a 20-year time.
Shockwave says, I must continue to communicate with Megatron. Or it's like he's been doing this for 4 million years. It's
Yeah,
like, come
exactly. But
on.
if you'd said it like any time before like 1940, anytime before radar, you could have gotten away with it. If they crashed, if you made it, exactly 100 years, right? If they had crashed in 1885, and then I'm sure you'd have some nice, Western Transformers, gunslinger type fiction in later years, But
Yeah. I
we
wanted
probably got, I
Yeah,
guess,
I
parts
wanted
of
to talk about Shockwave. I know this is not necessarily artwork related, but there's some drastic differences between the characterizations in Bob Budiansky. By the way, Bob, I have Bob signed up for an interview coming
Oh,
up.
cool.
I'm
Yeah,
looking forward to that. And
yeah, he's
I'm
great.
so happy he um, is a contributing guy. He's a helpful, very helpful guy. He sounds like because he
Oh,
has so much behind, like such a pedigree. Or
yeah, no, I mean, I was at his house. I've told the story many times, and he'll back me up on this. Thanksgiving weekend, like 2006, like in his basement, he has company over, and I'm like the troll in the basement, like scanning away. But no, he's very generous with his time, with his knowledge. So and thankfully he's a pack rat because not everybody saves stuff that they worked on, at the time, 30 years ago. So, now closer to 40.
he's my kind of guy. I don't consider myself a pack rat. I consider myself a valuable archivist. I'm like Rewind. I archive everything. The character Rewind.
Yeah,
Um,
I got
yeah.
the reference.
Okay. Some of the characters were drastically different in their personality from between what he had and what the cartoon had. I prefer Shockwave being the way he was in the Marvel comic books and the
I
like
suspect,
a mirror universe Spock.
I suspect that the difference came down to the cartoon writers already had a Starscream and
Mhm.
they felt like they didn't need another one. The stories are always a little bit more Autobot focused than Decepticon focused. It makes sense because they're the protagonists, but also there are more Autobot characters. There's more Autobot toys that need to get the showcase. So you didn't need as much in terms of the Decepticon showcases. You had the occasional episode like Carnage in C minor or Enter the Nightbird, but usually the Autobots were kind of the focus of the stories. And you didn't need two characters vying to take leadership away from Megatron. Starscream was a star, and Shockwave effectively wound up being the Cybertron guy. Like that is his role in Transformers seasons 1 and 2. Although you probably know a little bit about this. One of the things besides the movie draft that we were able to dig up from Flint was the early production material on Five Faces of Darkness, and Shockwave would have had the role that went to Blitzwing in the story as the
Yes,
guy
glad you
who had
brought that up.
vague memories of the Quintessons. Well, I feel like Shockwave was robbed there because it works so much better for Shockwave. First off, it gives him something to do. It gives him like a little bit of a last hurrah. But secondly, he looks like an older model
Yes, he
then
does.
he looks like a more primitive guy. He looks like he doesn't share the same design philosophy as the rest of them. I mean, in real life, it's because it was the Astro Magnum toy, right, and not a Diaclone or a Microman toy. But nonetheless, having a sort of story reason for it, it works really well. And then instead it goes to a random triple changer, and then they can't even keep that straight. And then like later on, it goes to Octane. So like it's very awkward as it plays out, and that would have been so. I don't need a Thief in the Night to be a Shockwave showcase, but I would have loved if Five Faces of Darkness, 3, 4, and 5 kind of gave that role to Shockwave.
That would have been great. I want to make sure to ask you if you've gotten a hold of the material that Chris Freely on his YouTube channel mentioned the pitches for the TV show. Uh, Early on, there was a pitch for like all spark. Well, I don't want to say all sparks, but the sparks to have come to Earth and then inhabited machines, our machines, and then Megatron had some way of gathering more reinforcements by putting new spirits basically into new machines. That's a very different take.
It is. So what you're talking about is the CBS pilot, and
Yes.
that's something that I managed to track down with a group of people, the Sunbow Marvel Archives. So give them a shout out and go check them out because they're a really great group. And what we wind up doing is we try and track down this sort of production material and then scan it in and get it online so that everybody can see it. And that was a real coup because we'd known about it for a while. We'd known that there was a CBS network pitch for what a Transformers season one would have looked like. Now, this is something that was was being developed sort of right after More Than Meets the Eye had been put into development. So simultaneous in some ways, and after it in others. But we definitely would have gotten the 3 episode More Than Meets the Eye just like we did. But then this was sort of a pitch for 13 episodes on network TV on Saturday mornings, like the Dungeons and Dragons cartoon or something, and it would have had to meet network standards. The Transformers cartoon was syndicated, so they produced it and then they shopped it around to local networks. So it wound up in cases like what would eventually become like Fox or the Paramount network or the WB network, the various ones that they had sort of in the early 90s. But before that, they'd sort of coalesced in that way. They were just the local operators. If it was on a network, it would have saved Hasbro a lot of trouble. They wouldn't have had to shop it around in every market. They would have just gone out to the whole country. But the trade-off is that then the network has a lot of say over what happens in the show. So this was the version that was developed sort of for what would work with network standards. And it's a very different vision, as you say. I mean, the idea of sort of I think they renamed him Negator rather than Megatron, probably because of the gun issue. Like
Yeah.
even back then, it could fly in syndication, but they probably CBS wasn't going to have their villain turn into a handgun. So they had him turn into a. It's not quite clear what it was. They called it like a particle beam satellite,
Oh,
but
yeah, something. I remember satellite something in there. Yeah, something.
yeah,
It rings a bell. And I don't want to speak for Flint Dille, but I can imagine Flint enjoying the freedom, the creative freedom, being in syndication. Whereas if you have a network, no, we have control standards, and this is for kids, and just the
yeah. Oh, and Flint came into Transformers in season 3. He'd been a Joe guy before that,
oh,
but so he wasn't involved so much in seasons 1 or 2. But I do think that writers would have um, bumped their heads against the network standards a little bit. I mean, they're pros. They would color within the lines. I have no doubt. But I think especially in season 2 and 3, there was quite a lot of freedom that was afforded them to go off and do pretty zany things. I think if it was it would have had a very different tone if it was on a network.
I want to go back to 1984, as we all might want to. If you could go back in time to 1984 and sit in one production meeting, whether it was Sunbow or Marvel Comics or Takara, which meeting would it be? Like, what would be your dream visit?
You know, it's an interesting question. There's no like one thing I'd like. What I'm really interested in, sort of now today in 2026, is tracking down the model sheets I don't have, which is mostly sort of season three incidental and season four rebirth incidental models. So those are the kind of things that I'd be interested in today. But in some ways, that's just the accident of what I don't have. If I had everything from 86 and 87, then I'd be saying, well, what I really want is the 84 incidental models, right? But you know, the rebirth, it's a little after 84, but the rebirth is very interesting. Like I'd like to know exactly, you know, if it was, at any point, a suggestion of, oh, well, write a 5 episode conclusion that introduces all these characters, or if what was said, and the paperwork from there, the designs like that, that would be very interesting to me. I feel like I kind of know um, what happened with the Transformers the movie pretty well, because that's very, we have a lot of memoranda going back and forth. We kind of know who the players were, what order things happened in, and more or less it's not so different for the original G1 cartoon. We have a little bit less for like more than meets the eye than we do for like the Transformers the movie. We don't have so much back and forth. We don't know. I mean, for all we know, there was a pitch of, oh well, here's the basic idea that it's 4 million years ago. They come to Earth, they crash. Volcano wakes them up. They have battles, and then the Autobot twin. Like that pitch feels like it could be a first draft. It doesn't necessarily feel like you needed a lot of like the Transformers the movie feels like it's had a couple of revisions to it, doesn't it? I mean, things like Blaster vanishing and whatnot. Like it feels like, you've had more than one cook in the kitchen.
Oh,
And I don't mean that in a bad way. It's just there's a lot going on. There's a lot,
oh, yeah.
More than meets the eye is a pretty comparatively straightforward story, I think. And it'd be a little interesting to know like whose idea was it to set it, have the 4 million year time jump, and why,
Yeah.
what is that? It's pretty neat that they have it,
It's
but
it'd
what
be
is that?
easier probably to pinpoint like there's the guy who introduced that, and there for more than meets the eye. Like this is where this came from. Easy to pin down
Yeah, well,
the
and
source
that's
of it.
where like that, sitting in those meetings would be interesting to me. And then the other one is, as Flint Dille has often described, sitting there in his apartment and banging out the secrets of Cybertron, and thinking it's just the greatest thing ever. Like that would be fun. And again, not so much watching him type, but seeing what that output was. And that's something that we haven't had any luck with. We haven't 100% given up on, but we haven't had much luck. So, I'll chat with Flint in
You never keep searching.
March.
Keep
So
searching.
yeah, no, you never give up, right? I mean, it's he doesn't. What I'll say with confidence is he doesn't have a hard copy of it.
Yeah.
So that
Um,
doesn't mean
Speaking of the Transformers movie, uh, the concept of the creation matrix, um, have you found information or details about how it's changed over time? I know that in the comic books, there was the creation matrix that was introduced at the very beginning. By the way, we have 10 more minutes. We
okay.
can continue and I can edit it back. If it vanishes, I'll try and contact you and so forth. But uh,
Okay.
yeah. Um, so the creation matrix or the matrix of leadership, do you have details about how it's evolved for the movie?
Well, it what's interesting there is it really does seem, based on the documentation we have, it really does seem like Bob for the comics came up with the idea of the creation matrix more or less independently of the of Ron coming up with the idea of the matrix of leadership. You know, it's interesting that that would happen. I mean, it's not crazy that they would both use the term matrix. I mean, the book Neuromancer by William Gibson had just come out in 1984, which is right about when they'd be sort of working on these materials, given the lead times. So and they were talking, he used the term matrix for cyberspace, which was a concept he basically invented. Uh, it's a seminal book for the cyberpunk genre. But so the idea that that term would get picked up independently by two writers who were in that milieu isn't crazy. And in many ways is a happy accident because then it allows the sort of conversion. Simon Furman effectively combines those two concepts into the creation matrix residing within the matrix of leadership, and it's but beyond that, I don't think, Bob needed a way to introduce the characters. So, okay, well, let's say the Transformers have a life force, and it's within Optimus Prime. It gives them a reason to keep Optimus Prime around, a little bit more, when all the rest of the Autobots are hanging like, beef carcasses.
Upside down,
Great. Yeah, great
after
imagery.
Shockwave comes
Great.
in.
That was my first comic issue, and boy, that was trippy. That was quite a good one. And it ends, the issue 5 of Marvel ends with Optimus Prime's head there, and it's all wired up, and it gives a reason for that, right? That Shockwave wants new troops. I mean, it's kind of the same reason that the space bridge is introduced and Cybertron is reintroduced as a setting for the Transformers cartoon. But then, Ron just needed a MacGuffin to blow up Unicron. So, and the idea that it's a bauble, within Optimus Prime's chest, and then Floridary, winds up, coming up with various designs for it. I think he said it was based on like a nuclear explosion. So, yeah, I mean, we know how each of these concepts independently developed, and then you could see sort of Simon Furman's, the wheels turning in real time and saying, okay, well, obviously we don't need two matrices. That's silly, and walking back the idea that it's a software program, it's there's a physical object too, and Shockwave just didn't happen to know that, and he had whatever residual matrix energy resided in Prime's skull. It's a little bit clumsy, but then it's Marvel Comics in the '80s. You're allowed to be a little bit clumsy.
Yeah. Still continuing with the Transformers the movie, I've got two questions. First of all, an easy question. Ultra Magnus. I bet you know where I'm going with this. Sweeps,
Oh,
terminate him.
oh,
And they
oh,
go in, and
yeah,
it looks like you could make an argument that the animation was supposed to be him, his arms and breaking off and legs and so forth. And
yeah.
then,
They're getting
yeah,
drawn and quartered. Yeah, I mean
yeah.
that came from earlier draft of the script, and in fact, as you probably know, made it into the comic book adaptation. So and indeed, it looks like they're following sort of solid beams rather than the sort of
Oh,
blasts. So yeah, I
yeah.
mean it does feel like something that might have changed relatively late in the game, but probably motivated by standards and practices. They didn't want to have anything too gory. I mean, it would have been a very memorable scene in a movie that's full of very memorable scenes. But
Um,
I actually thought you might be going in the sort of Delta Magnus direction because I was,
oh,
you know, the earliest trailers of the movies used his Japanese, powered convoy um,
yes.
deco. So
Yeah, which have been and made it that far into the trailer, the early
yeah,
trailer. Yeah.
yeah. Well, it wasn't a trailer. It was like a sizzle reel, right? So they could show
Oh,
around to investors to try and gin up enthusiasm to get it into theaters.
yeah. I wanted to ask about the early Ron Friedman drafts. And I've noticed elements of Star Wars in there, like the Death Star and the and RC's design, and even lightsabers. You've got lightsabers in there.
A little bit,
Um,
sure.
So there's some sense of
I think it's funny that the new Hot Rod toy has the sword and the shield, and I feel like if you know nothing, if you just picked up the toy and you knew that this was the protagonist of the movie, you'd be like, oh yeah, he's running around with the sword and shield. It's like in blink and you miss it scene that's only there for comic relief, But now we have
time
the,
out, time
and
out,
I mean, it
time
looks
out.
great. They look awesome, but they're not very important. Yeah, I would say his razor blade's more important. But, but anyway,
Oh,
sorry, I
oh
interrupted
no,
you.
no, that's fine. Some elements
Start.
are fantasy, others are sci-fi. Let me see. I was wondering if you had any information about the different hands, as we were saying before, cooks, many cooks in there. It as enjoyable is it? It seems like they were going in different directions. It was like a rough draft that was animated before they fine-tuned it.
Well, I mean, I think anytime you're doing animation, right? It's a time consuming uh, process. So you're mostly, I'm sure you can find exceptions, but mostly you're gonna nail down what's gonna happen before you start animating. But you know, it's I think it's more the case that Ron turned in his first draft and it was really a really big story where a lot happens. Some of it sort of apropos of nothing, and I think it wound up being sort of the executive's job to kind of pare it down. And Ron's second draft is a lot closer to what winds up on the screen, and then Flint comes in and turns in sort of the final version that is what we see. And I think the tone is a holdover from sort of just Ron's creative process. He's the guy who wrote all the GI Joe five parters. The not every GI Joe five parter, but he wrote he wrote the miniseries from '83 and then '84. And really had that sort of like, let's have adventures, split up the teams, have adventures all over the world, and then we'll pull them together for the big climax, the Weather Dominator, the Mass Device. And, that's the kind of energy, but amped even more up that he was bringing to the Transformers the movie. He wanted a lot of exotic locales. One of the hallmarks of the first draft of the Transformers film that he did was there were more locations on Earth. That got pared down, right? The only Earth location you really see is Autobot City. But they kept sort of the idea of okay, and then they go to space, but even in space, they wind up, again, similar to sort of that GI Joe five-parter energy. They wind up, getting their teams split up, and Hot Rod and Cup go off to Quintessa, and the rest of the team goes to junk. They have space battles, they crash, they wind up converging, and then having their big climax at Cybertron. I think that energy, I think that was what Ron was going for. I think I don't think it's in any way a failure. I think he achieved the tone that he wanted, which was really a frenetic, fast-paced adventure, with lots of bizarre and cool imagery that sort of all winds up in a climax all in one spot.
You were a major architect behind the Ask Vector Prime feature, which helped codify the complex Transformers multiverse. Was there ever a fan question that was so difficult it actually forced you and the team to invent some piece of lore that's since become official canon? Could you talk about the experience with
Sure.
Ask
I mean,
Vector Prime?
we invented a lot of lore. I mean, what do you mean by canon, right? I mean, the wiki people will archive everything on Ask Vector Prime. Uh, Other people sort of can feel free to use it or disregard as they choose. I thought it was pretty neat when Hasbro used the Five Faces of Darkness head for Prima. That was a fun moment for me, and perhaps a less fun moment for people who didn't like that particular retcon. But lots of it's uh, shown up in various official media over the years, but partly just as a function of sort of how the wiki chooses to document things, right? That I come out with my little little brain tsunami ideas, and then they go out into the ether, and then they document them, and then because they're documented, other people can pick up on them more easily and use them if they so choose. You know, questions. I don't know if difficult is the right word to use, because if there was a question we didn't like, we just wouldn't engage. We weren't under any obligation to. There were questions that necessitated work. Someone had asked about the there was a British comic book continuation of the Transformers Michael Bay films where Megatron won at the end of the first film. And then, they had sort of a dark universe go on after that. But it pretty much only covered the events of the first film. And somebody said, well, what happened in subsequent films? And that required a lot of reason. That required me to basically rewatch all of the other Michael Bay films that had come out up to that point, which I think was all of them. So I had to rewatch. I think that might have even been the first time I'd seen the fifth Michael Bay film, was for that. But I mean, I didn't have to, but to do the question justice, and it's a fun question, and I'd read the miniseries in question, and it's a pretty good. It's good, Furman grimdark kind of storytelling, and it's a fun question. Well, what does Cemetery wind up looking like in this universe? What happens if and when lockdown shows up in this universe? Those are interesting, and it's like, okay, well, and I got to kind of retell the entire Michael Bay film universe, films two, three, four, five. Uh,
That
so that
that
was fun,
month or
but
so
but that was
watching
that was
those.
that was hours and hours and hours of work. You know, so uh, so difficult in a sense, certainly time consuming, but I wouldn't have done it if I didn't want to. So that was fun. Sometimes you get questions where they just want you to, like the universe stream questions were one that I think wound up being a little bit contentious. Like it was one where it's really easy to do because it was just math, right? And people are just saying, "Oh, what's the math on this?" And I guess what they're really, because they could presumably do the math themselves. What they were really saying is, canonize the math on this. And I think originally I had a little bit of a bias towards doing it just because it was easy. Well, here's a way to answer a question, and I'm pretty sure I'll get it right. But then eventually there was like a bit of a backlash of like, well, it feels like that's all we're doing. It's, just checking boxes. And said, okay, well, we can, I'm okay not doing that too. If the audience isn't there for it, is it adding a lot of value to the universe? I mean, arguably not really. Like if you really care what the universe stream designation is, certainly at the time it was easy enough to figure out. It might be harder now because there's more new continuities, but even still, um, those were easy, but not necessarily uh, well received by the audience, or at least not towards the latter half of the run. It was a fun experience because it was so interactive. It was so real time. Like the feedback would be almost immediate. Like you get that dopamine hit of, somebody asks a question, and we could turn around and answer in a week or two. And then they got the hit of seeing it, and we got to see their reaction and other people's reaction. Then there were the people who'd rush off to the wiki immediately to document it,
Yeah.
which
It's a quick react. Was it when an actor performs, you get that immediate response, like live action, immediate
yeah,
response.
yeah. If you're doing theater, right? And it's funny you mention actors because we had quite a few of them lend their talent to the column. Richard Newman reprised his role as Vector Prime, John Bailey, and uh, what is his Optimus Prime. We had David Sobolov do his Shockwave. Uh, um, Peter Spellos, returned as Skybite. So we had a lot of actors come in and do their thing, which was that was a real treat, to hear my words come to life in that fashion. And then Kellen Goff did the Bumblebee segment of the column where he was doing the Michael Bay Bumblebee with the radio noises, and he really nailed that. He really got that. The radio tuning effect, which is not that easy to do. I haven't seen it done that well, um, generally speaking, and he really did a great job with that. So it was kind of cool to see that, and we could use clips, as long as they were less than like 4 or 5 seconds. You could have a tiny bit of a song or something in there, and fall within reasonable free use. So we got to, yeah, yeah, no, I mean, yeah,
It's
you
all
could,
enough to be able to
yeah,
fit.
you could get half the chorus, of a song. Yeah,
Mm.
but
Yeah.
but yeah, it was fun. It
Yeah.
was a good time for me.
Here's my penultimate question, and the final question is easy one. Um, Going to the aligned continuity, this is probably for every franchise, Star Trek and so forth. You've got several different continuities. You got the Marvel comic books, you got the animation, you got several different animated series and so forth. Um, what was the challenge? What were the challenges to constructing like a singular history?
Well, I mean, I wasn't really involved in building the aligned continuity, right? I mean, I didn't work for Hasbro, so I wasn't part of that. That's a question for like Aaron Archer, or Rick Alvarez, or maybe some of the people who worked on Prime, or the video games, at High Moon Studios. But I, from my perspective as an archivist, I'd say the challenge is that when you have a bunch of different creative people and they're not in the same room and they're working in different mediums, you're going to wind up, with something that has discontinuities, right? Like, which is fine. I don't think discontinuities are a major problem, but I think if you want to call it aligned, it could be at least a little bit awkward to try and pretend like this all happened in the same universe when you have like robots in disguise Grimlock, who's obviously not the same guy as the Grimlock that shows up in the video games and whatnot. Like I think that's forgivable. I think it's unfortunate if you want to go with the conceit that it's all the same
Mm.
universe. Aaron Archer said, it passes the squint test, right? It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to kind of sort of fit together if you squint.
Sound like it,
And
seem like it fits. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
I,
it's continuity-ish.
I don't know if you're a Star Trek fan as well,
I Yeah, I like.
but
I'm
they
like,
wisely. Hmm?
I've been watching Academy. I'm enjoying.
Oh, cool. In it's the 2009 Star Trek movie, they did a clever maneuver where they went into an alternate timeline, and there's something about fans I don't understand. Fans like to have, I guess, or some fans like to have like a consistent one continuity, whereas I'm perfectly fine just reading the comic books, like the original Marvel comic books. It's their own thing, and then the cartoon is their own thing.
I mean, those are the two philosophies, right? That you can do. You can say, hey, there's a lot of Transformers out there. There's Marvel comics, and there's also the Sunbow TV show, and there's also the Ladybird books, and they don't have to fit together. And then there's Beast Wars, which kind of fits in with all of that, sort of, and then Beast Machines, which definitely is borrowing from Transformers, the original G1 cartoon. But then you have the Armada trilogy, and those all more or less go together. But there's also the Armada comic book, which is its own thing, and then Energon, which follows it, and Transformers Animated, which is its own thing. Although it's going to do a few little flashbacks to G1, so what's that about? That's interesting, and no, you have Transformers Prime, which is sort of in continuity with all the rest of Aligned and sort of not. And you can do that philosophy, and some properties do team. Ninja Turtles is happy to reinvent itself every few years, and again, it's something where you had comic books, and then you had a cartoon, and then you had movies, and they did none of them played nice with each other. But although these days there's a lot of dimension jumping, so you might actually go back and revisit the original black and white comic book continuity if you want. But that's one philosophy. Or you could kind of do the sort of uh, idea that it is all one continuity, like Doctor Who, right? Yeah, wibbly wobbly, timey wimey. It all happened. There's various excuses for why something might not match up. I mean, time travel is a good excuse, right? And Neil Patrick Harris's character said he broke the universe and put it back together. So if there's anything wrong, that's why. Uh, like it's a handy explanation, right? But that's the other philosophy, and you could kind of go in between a little bit. I mean, famously, Star Wars had their like tiers of continuity, right? Like it's all continuity, but if something contradicts something else, movies outrank TV shows, outrank video games, outrank books, outrank comic books. So
Mhm.
like as long as it doesn't nothing up the chain has contradicted it, it's all one continuity, and the ones that contradicted are just sort of wrong,
Mhm.
or you do Star Trek, right, where it's all sort of one continuity, and occasionally you have another timeline like Kelvin, but you have the non-canon stuff, so you have your memory alphas and your memory betas, right? So
Right.
it's either canon or it's not, and the books and the comics for the most part are not. I
Yeah,
mean,
I think
but
it. Yeah, if they're as long as within their own continuity, like timeline of the multiverse, if you think about it like a multiverse within the that one strand, if it's consistent, I think you're.
But
I
of course,
think
it's not, right? I mean,
yeah.
like Khan came from the eugenic wars of the 1960s, right?
Mm,
I mean, whenever you have a show that's long running, you're going to wind up in those sort of, I mean, Transformers, right? It is the year 2005. The Soviet Union's still around. I mean, it's the Twin Towers are still up. It's a little bit awkward, right? You know, it, it, that's what happens, right? You catch up to your if you set something in the future, sooner or later you get to the future, and of course it's
we're gonna
not
reach
that.
yeah. It's 2000. Big news, folks. We're past 2005. It's not the future
No, no. I
anymore.
mean, we're up in the Master Force range, right? At this point,
Hmm.
I think. What year is Master Force? Do you remember?
I don't know. I haven't gotten into Master Force.
I want to say it's around 2020. So I kind of want to check now. No, 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 no.
People in the comments are probably saying, it's this, it's
They're like,
this.
come on, you dweebs.
Yeah.
Everybody knows. Everybody knows. All right. Let's see. 2020. Oh, yeah,
Oh,
2020 of the Decepticon headmaster, Decepticon pretenders. So yeah, around 2020. Okay, yeah. So yeah, like I thought, we've caught up to Master Force. We have not caught up to Victory quite yet, but we'll
and Victory's towards the end of it. I mean,
it is,
end of
right?
that.
Yeah, it went Transformers 2010, Master Force, Headmasters, Master Force, Victory, and then Zone.
Zone, right? Zone is the one.
And then but to your point about like,
Yeah.
there's a big multiverse. In Japan, they tried really hard not to have a multiverse. They tried to slot everything into their same
Oh, really?
continuity. Got more and more rickety, but eventually not like the comics, but everything animated. But eventually that edifice, they threw up their hands and said fine, and there are other ones too.
Yeah,
But
we
they
can't
still
do
they still
this.
go back to that. The Japanese G1 continuity is much more involved and more frequently revisited than the American one.
Oh, that's interesting. Like culturally, that's more
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah, yeah. They had a lot of comic books that have come out that take place within that. A lot of times, new Toylands will come out and they'll have some story that'll justify it in that context. And of course, it's awkward because the timeline is so far flung, right?
Mhm.
You had all of these. You had all the ones I just went through, through Zone, and then sort of after that in real life, then you had Transformers Generation Two, right? So sort of that's what comes next, So uh, it's interesting how you square all those circles.
Yeah. I got to mention this. I don't remember the name. I was watching a YouTube channel. It was a podcast about they talk about Transformers, and he nicknamed himself Weird Wolf. I don't remember the name of the podcast, but somebody, I think it was somebody there who had mentioned he had gotten hold of the original actual cardboard of Mirage. It had been recolored pink or something for perhaps the Generation 2 thing. And I found it interesting that they would actually literally alter the original artwork. It's so sacred. And
Yeah, well, it wasn't back then. It was production
yeah,
artwork, right? I mean, famously, Duke from GI Joe, was painted over with the Tiger Force colors. So
oh,
there's no original art that still exists for Duke in his classic colors. It's Tiger Force Duke now, because there wasn't digital in the '80s. So yeah, no, the Mirage with the Gator deco is a fun one. That's it's neat to see that, as made into a toy finally.
I imagine you've gotten access to these different altered versions, well, the originals, but then altered.
Well, in many cases, I mean, not in every case, but when I was working on the Transformers Legacy book of packaging art, I was able to track down quite a lot of material, oftentimes transparencies, first generation copies from the artwork up to something. And those are great to work with. They make very, very high reproductions. That's why they are created in the first place. And occasionally the actual physical piece of original art, but that was infrequent. But it was neat to see those. To me, oftentimes the fun ones are the ones that didn't make it to shelves. So stuff like that Mirage. G2 had quite a lot of that, but there was some stuff from G1 that was produced, but then hadn't made it. It looked like there was at least some thought into bringing the Multiforce over from Transformers Victory over to the U.S. because some of those guys had new artwork made up for them. Six Shot was done up in Decepticon colors, so I don't know what that was about. If he was originally conceived of as a Decepticon, or possibly if that was a repaint that they were thinking about doing. But it's fun to find that Rick Alvarez dug up the individual bodies for the big MicroMaster combiner base. So the package has the art of the base, but they have two little heads, MicroMaster heads. But those heads were excerpts from full paintings that had never been shown before. So those debuted in the Legacy book. That was pretty neat to see. And kudos to Rick for recognizing what he had, because he showed them to me at first. I was like, oh, cool, MicroMasters. He's like, no. These are MicroMasters that you've never seen before. Oh, okay. Yeah, and as soon as he said it, I was like, oh, he's right. He's right. But to some degree, like you see in one MicroMaster, you've seen them all. Like my brain did not immediately go like the same. Like when I saw Schick's Quick Switch, I was like, oh my god, does that become Quick Switch? That's cool. Or the Multiforce, like that immediately registered, or Alligator Mirage. But like the MicroMasters didn't immediately register in the same way. But as soon as I accepted it, I'm like, oh yeah, that is actually super cool.
Cool. Yeah, I'd love to get an interview with Rick Alvarez.
Yeah, if you
Um,
reach out to him, he's
yeah.
a good guy, easy to find, and he has a lot of insight into what was going on at Hasbro at that time, and before that he was really big in the fandom as well. So he could talk to that experience.
I'm writing a book right now, and I'm about the history of the Transformers franchise, and I'd like to pin down, the micro change artwork, the original Diaclone artwork, like at some point in probably 1986, really 1985 for the 1986 launch. American artists, I suppose, were then creating the box art, what packaging art. Somewhere the Japanese, there were Japanese artists, I guess, that were doing it's foggy in my mind anyway. I'd have to do more research, but
Yeah, but it depends. Sometimes you could like alter the Japanese artwork with like a transparency, like paint like an Autobot symbol on it and call it a day. Other times you'd have to basically recreate it. You'd have the original as reference, but then you'd have to go ahead and just repaint Devastator. Today you'd probably do it digitally,
yeah.
but at the time that wasn't an option. So yeah, you get the the reference for that, and then do them up. So like guys like Mark Watts would have been doing that, or Andrew Perlmutter. Like I remember Andrew Perlmutter, who had done some of the box art. He had maybe it was one of the Dinobots, maybe Sludge, but the Diaclone, the original Diaclone version. So presumably he had gotten that for reference, so he could, he hadn't altered that original, but yeah, he had that something that he could use. So yeah, and then of course quickly they ran out of Diaclone, and some of the Diaclone guys didn't have artwork or didn't have artwork that they liked, and then they would recreate it. Again, Mark Watts wound up doing all the mini bots. The mini bots did have Japanese artwork, but either they didn't like it or they didn't have access to it because he wound up and they didn't redraw. He didn't repaint. It's all airbrush. He didn't repaint any of those. Those are all brand new interpretations of the toys.
Yeah, I know Skids, there are two different ones of Skids. There's I remember there's him running. I don't remember which one was in the American market. There was him like in a running pose, and then there's one that where he's I guess more or less standing. I think Triptychon had a similar thing when there were different. Yeah.
Yeah. A few of them had different art for different markets. And sometimes that was like I'm not sure why Triptychon had different art for Japan because they're both the dinosaur mode. But sometimes it was just a question of like what mode are they packaged in, So like the clones were packaged in robot mode in one market and in alt mode in the other. So there's Japanese art and American art, and between the two of them, you get the alt modes and the robot modes. So and I think Blitzwing was the same way.
Oh,
He was. I think Blitzwing. Yeah, I think Blitzwing had it was in like tank mode in one market and jet mode in the other. So they used the same robot mode, but they had a different artwork for the vehicle mode. So you had that occasionally.
yeah, that makes sense. As we're closing, is there anything? First of all, I want to extend a pleasure to you. You're my second interview, believe it or not, and
I don't believe you. You're lying.
yeah. No, I built up skill really fast because I care about these interviews, and you're wonderful because of your work in terms of archiving the stuff that should be preserved and the stories should be told, recorded. Is there anything you'd like to plug? Is anything you'd like to say to all
Yeah,
mankind?
well, you should. If you're coming to TFCon, we're going to be debuting the Mirror Mirror Transformers animated comic. So I've done some work in that. I'd love to see you there and pick up the comics. They're really cool. And I'm going to do a plug on behalf of someone else because I think you and presumably your audience might be interested in this. James Roberts has written Generation Next, which is a book about the history of the Transformers fandom. I think I even have a copy here if I can find it. Yeah, there we go. So
Nice title.
yeah, it's all about the early history of the fandom. It's beautifully researched. It's got a lot of the early like fanzines. Um,
Wow.
yeah, no, he really did his homework on it, and
It's a
now
nice,
is the
it's a thick,
yeah. So if that's something you're interested in, you should send an email to someplace.
while you're looking
You
that
can
up,
you
is it
can you can
available?
edit this down and put it on your link. But
Okay,
here it
great.
is. Yeah, you could send an email to mtmte.books@gmail.com. So I would recommend doing that, and I'll send you a copy. So
Oh, thanks. Yeah.
yeah.
Do you know if it's available on Amazon if anybody would like to buy?
To my knowledge, it's not. To my knowledge, this is something that it's coming out from his own imprint. So,
Oh,
but it's a cool book, and if you're interested in the history, if you're writing a book about the history, you should probably know what's out there. You also, and I'm not going to plug this book, but you might want to read the book Toy Wars as well. It's not all going to be interesting to you, but there is going to be a couple of chapters that are right in the period you're interested in.
yeah, I've read that. I
Okay,
don't own
okay,
a
okay.
copy, but yeah, I agree. It's at the top of the list there. I think you'd mentioned an event happening, and I don't think you mentioned the date.
Oh,
Um,
TFCon
TFCon, yeah.
in Burbank, yeah. what are the dates on that? So yeah, TFCon Los Angeles, and that is, and Peter Cullen's going to be there, and Frank
Hmm.
Welker. Um, yeah, that's March 13th through 15th. So I'll be there if you want to say hi, and it's going to be your first place to get the Mirror Mirror comics, and it'll be a good time. It always is.
All right. Thanks. I'll let you get going and thank you again.
You're very welcome.
Oh, I'd like
All
to
right, good
interview
luck.
again in the future. There's so much to
Yeah,
talk
there's
about.
always more to say.